The frozen earth cracked beneath Zachary Lawson's boots as he rode into what remained of his life, and what he saw made him question whether the cold had finally addled his brain. A woman in a threadbare coat, bent over the iron-hard ground, desperately trying to plant seeds in soil that refused to give. December 1883 had settled over Shafter, Texas like a curse, bringing with it a cold snap that nobody in these parts had seen in living memory. The silver mines still operated, coughing up their precious metal while men coughed up their lungs, but the ranches and small farms surrounding the town had fallen into a desperate silence. Zachary had been riding for 3 days straight from El Paso, carrying news he wished he could forget, when he spotted her there beside a collapsing homestead that looked like it was held together by little more than hope and determination. He pulled his horse to a stop, the leather of his saddle creaking in the bitter air. Steam rose from his mount's nostrils in great plumes. The woman didn't look up, didn't acknowledge his presence, just kept stabbing at the frozen ground with what looked like a bent spoon, her fingers wrapped in strips of cloth that had once been part of a dress. "Madam," Zachary called out, his voice rough from days of silence. "That ground is frozen solid. Won't nothing take root in that?" She paused then, but didn't turn to face him. Her shoulders, thin beneath the inadequate coat, straightened with what he recognized as pride. "I know what I am doing, stranger. Best you keep riding." Her voice carried an accent he couldn't quite place, something that spoke of education and refinement that seemed wildly out of place in this desolate stretch of West Texas. Zachary should have taken her advice. He had his own demons to outrun, his own failures to reconcile. But something about the futility of her task, the sheer stubborn determination in the set of her shoulders, made him dismount instead. "Maybe you do," he said, leading his horse closer. "But I have been working land since I could walk, and I am telling you that even if you get those seeds in the ground, they will die before they ever see spring." This time she did turn, and Zachary felt something shift in his chest. Her face was thin, gaunt even, with hollow cheeks that spoke of too many missed meals. But her eyes burned with a fierce intelligence and determination that seemed to light her whole face. They were an unusual green, like new grass, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to look away even as he found himself unable to. "Then I will plant them again in spring," she said, "and again after that if I must, but I will not give up this land." She looked to be in her middle 20s, not much younger than his own 28 years, though hardship had etched lines around her eyes that spoke of struggles beyond her age. Dark hair escaped from beneath a hat that had seen better days, falling around her face in waves that she impatiently pushed back. Zachary glanced at the homestead behind her. The structure was small, barely more than a single room with what might have been a lean-to attached. Several boards had come loose, and he could see where the wind had torn away chunks of the roof. No smoke rose from the chimney, which meant either she had no wood or she was trying to conserve what little she had. "You living out here alone?" he asked, knowing he was being forward but needing to understand what he was looking at, her chin lifted. "That is none of your concern. It is if you are trying to work this land by yourself in the middle of winter," he countered. "Where is your husband, your family?" Something flickered across her face, pain quickly masked. "Dead. Both of them. The fever took my father 3 weeks ago and my husband went a month before that. Anything else you would like to know about my personal tragedy, or can I return to my work?" The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut, but underneath it Zachary heard the tremor of grief barely contained. He recognized it because he carried his own, fresh and raw despite the miles he had put between himself and El Paso. "I am sorry for your losses," he said quietly. But planting seeds in frozen ground won't bring them back, and it won't save this place. I know that, she snapped, then seemed to deflate slightly. I just need something to do, something that feels like hope, even if it is foolish. Zachary understood that better than she could know. He had ridden away from everything he knew 3 days ago, because standing still had become unbearable. Keeping moving, having a purpose however small, was sometimes all that stood between a person and complete despair. He tied his horse to the remains of a fence post and knelt beside her. "Well, if we are going to do something foolish, we might as well do it right. You got a proper shovel." She looked at him with suspicion and something that might have been hope. "Why would you help me?" "Because I have been where you are, standing in the ruins of everything you built, trying to will things back to how they were. It does not work, but I understand the need to try." For a long moment she studied his face, as if trying to read the truth of his words. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "There is a shovel in the lean-to. The handle is cracked, but it still works, and I am Delilah Nichols." "Zachary Lawson," he replied, standing and offering his hand. She took it after a moment's hesitation, her grip firm despite the cold that must have been making her fingers numb. Even through the cloth wrapping them, he could feel how small her hand was, how fragile, though there was nothing fragile about the way she met his eyes. The shovel was indeed in the lean-to, along with precious little else. A few tools in poor repair, some empty crates, and what looked like a nearly depleted supply of firewood. Zachary made a mental note of that as he took the shovel and returned to where Delilah waited. The ground resisted every attempt to break it. The cold had driven deep, turning the soil into something more like stone than earth. Zachary's shoulders burned with the effort of driving the shovel down, leveraging up chunks of frozen dirt that Delilah quickly broke apart with her makeshift tool. "What were you planting?" he asked after they had managed to create a small trench. "Winter wheat," she said. "I know it is too late, that the timing is all wrong, but my father, he kept saying we needed to get the seeds in before the ground froze. He was sick, could not do it himself, and my husband was already gone. I tried, but I was taking care of father, and then he was gone too, and I realized I had failed at the last thing he asked of me." Her voice broke on the last words, and Zachary saw her swipe at her eyes with the back of her cloth-wrapped hand. He kept working, giving her privacy in her grief, understanding that sometimes the kindest thing was to pretend not to notice. "It is not too late," he said finally, even though he suspected it might be. "The ground will thaw eventually. We can prepare these beds now, and when spring comes you can plant. Winter wheat will not work, but you could do regular wheat or corn or whatever grows well in these parts." "You know farming then?" she asked, her voice steadier now. "Grew up on a ranch north of here. We ran cattle mostly, but we kept crops too. Had to know how to work the land because hired help was not always reliable." He paused, driving the shovel in again. "That life is behind me now." What happened? It was his turn to feel the knife of memory twist. "My brother and I inherited the ranch from our father 5 years back. We built it up, made it into something profitable. Then my brother decided to expand, take out loans to buy more land, more cattle. I told him it was too much too fast, but he would not listen. 6 months ago a drought hit, lost most of the herd, could not pay back the loans, the bank took everything." "I am sorry," Delilah said softly. "That must have been terrible." "The worst part was watching my brother put a gun in his mouth 3 days ago because he could not live with the failure," Zachary said, the words coming out flat and dead. "I found him in the barn. By the time I got to El Paso to tell his wife, she had already heard and left town with their children. Did not even want to see me. Blamed me for not stopping him, I suppose. Maybe she was right." The shovel slipped from his hands, clattering against the frozen ground. He stood there, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of the last 3 days crash over him like a wave. He had not said those words out loud to anyone, had barely allowed himself to think them, and now here he was telling his troubles to a stranger. Delilah's hand touched his arm, light and uncertain. You could not have known what he would do. You could not have stopped him if he was determined. "I should have been there," Zachary said. "I should have found a way to save the ranch. I should have done something different. And I should have planted these seeds a month ago when there was still time," Delilah replied. "We can both drown in should-haves, or we can do what we can with what we have left." He looked down at her, this thin slip of a woman who had lost everything but was still here, still fighting, still trying to plant seeds in frozen ground because it was better than giving up. Something in his chest that had felt locked tight since finding his brother began to ease, just a fraction. "You are right," he said, picking up the shovel again. "We keep going." They worked until the light began to fail, managing to prepare 3 long rows in the hard earth. It was back-breaking work, made harder by the cold and the condition of the tools, but Zachary found a strange comfort in the physical labor. His hands blistered and his back ached, but his mind was focused on the task, rather than circling endlessly around his failures. When it became too dark to see properly, Delilah straightened and looked at their work. "Thank you," she said. "I could not have done this alone. I know it is probably pointless, but it matters anyway." "It is not pointless," Zachary assured her. "Come spring, this ground will be ready. You will have a good start on a garden that will see you through next winter." She smiled at that, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face entirely. "That is assuming I make it through this winter, but I appreciate the optimism." The reality of her situation suddenly struck him fully. Night was falling, the temperature was dropping even further, and she was out here alone with almost no wood and probably not much food. The homestead would provide minimal shelter at best, and from what he had seen, she did not have adequate clothing for this kind of cold. "When did you last eat?" he asked bluntly, her expression shuddered. "I have food." "That was not what I asked. This morning," she said after a pause. "Some cornmeal mixed with water. And before that, I fail to see how this is your concern." Zachary walked to his horse and began unpacking his saddlebags. "It becomes my concern when I spend the afternoon working alongside someone who is clearly half-starved. I have supplies. Not much, but enough to share." "I do not need charity," Delilah said, her voice tight. "It is not charity. Call it payment for letting me help. I needed something to do today, same as you. You gave me that. Now we are going to eat something hot, and I am going to fix the worst of the damage to your roof so you do not freeze tonight." "You cannot stay here," she protested. "It would not be proper." "I will sleep in the lean-to, or outside if you prefer. But I am not riding off and leaving you here without wood or food in weather like this." For a moment he thought she would argue further, pride warring with pragmatism across her expressive face. Finally, pragmatism won. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Truly. I know I should refuse, but I am tired of being cold and hungry and pretending I am fine when I am not." The admission seemed to cost her, and Zachary felt a surge of respect for this woman, who could acknowledge her need for help without losing her dignity. He had known plenty of men who could not manage that much. Inside, the homestead was even more stark than he had expected. A rough table with 2 chairs, one of them broken. A straw mattress in the corner with blankets too thin for this weather. A small stove with barely any wood beside it. A few personal items on a shelf. A Bible, a tintype photograph in a frame, a woman's brush with most of the bristles missing. Delilah watched him take it in, her chin raised defensively. It is not much, but it was ours. My father built it when we first came to Texas 5 years ago." "Where were you before?" Zachary asked, building up the small fire in the stove and setting his coffee pot on top. "Virginia. Father was a teacher there and I helped him. We had a good life. Then my mother died and father could not bear to stay in the place where everything reminded him of her. We came west looking for a fresh start." She sat in the one intact chair, her hands folded in her lap. "We filed a homestead claim, started working the land. It was hard, but it was ours. Father met a widower in town, a man named Henry Nichols. He was older, in his 50s, but kind. When he asked to court me, Father encouraged it, said he wanted to know I would be taken care of." "You did not want to marry him?" Zachary asked, measuring coffee into the pot. "I did not want to," Delilah said carefully. "He was a good man, patient and gentle. He never made me feel like I was an obligation. We married 2 years ago and it was fine. Not a grand passion, but a partnership. We were going to build something together." Her voice grew softer. "Then the fever came. It took half the town. Henry got it first, tried to fight it off, but he was not young anymore. Father got it while nursing Henry. And I stayed well, healthy as a horse, while they both died." The bitterness in that last statement spoke volumes. Zachary pulled hardtack, dried beef, and a small sack of beans from his supplies. It was not much, but it was better than cornmeal and water. He set the beans to soak for tomorrow and cut thin slices of the beef, placing them directly on the top of the stove to heat. "Survivor's guilt is a hard thing," he said. "You wonder why you were spared when others were taken. Wonder if maybe you should have gotten sick instead." "How did you know?" Delilah asked. "Because I feel the same way about my brother. Why did I walk away when the ranch failed and he could not? What made me different? Was I stronger or just more of a coward?" The coffee began to boil, filling the small space with its rich aroma. Zachary had not realized how much he missed that smell, the comfort of it. He poured 2 cups, handing one to Delilah and watching as she wrapped her cloth-covered hands around it, breathing in the steam. "When is the last time you had coffee?" he asked. "Before Father died. We had a little, but I used it trying to keep him alert, keep him with me. Did not work." She took a sip and closed her eyes. "This tastes like heaven." They ate in companionable silence, the small meal disappearing quickly. Zachary noticed that Delilah ate slowly, as if trying to make each bite last, and he suspected she had been going without for longer than she had admitted. He made a mental note to leave her most of his remaining supplies before he moved on. If he moved on, the thought surprised him. He had no particular destination in mind, had just been running from the memories that haunted El Paso. But watching Delilah warm her hands on the coffee cup, seeing the subtle easing of tension in her shoulders as the food settled in her stomach, he felt something shift. Here was someone who needed help, who was fighting to survive against odds that would have broken most people. Here was a purpose, if he chose to take it. "The roof is in bad shape," he said after they had finished eating. "I saw some boards in the lean-to. They are not great, but they will work for patches. Tomorrow I can ride into Shafter, see about getting proper materials." "I do not have money to pay you," Delilah said. "Did not ask for money. Consider it an investment in the spring we are planting for." She looked at him curiously. "You speak as if you plan to be here in spring." Did he? Zachary turned the question over in his mind. A few hours ago he had been adrift, purposeless, running from pain with no destination in sight. Now, sitting in this poor homestead with this determined woman, he felt the first stirrings of something he had not felt in months, the desire to build rather than run. "Maybe I do," he said. "If you would not object to the help. This place needs more than a roof. That fence is falling down, the well cover is broken, the whole structure needs reinforcing before it collapses. And come spring, if you are serious about working this land, you will need help breaking ground, planting, tending. That is too much for one person. I told you, I cannot pay you, Delilah repeated, but there was something in her voice, a yearning that told him she wanted to accept even as pride held her back. Room and board, Zachary said. I will sleep in the lean-to for propriety. You feed me and give me a place to stay, and I will work the land with you. We split whatever harvest we manage to bring in, 50-50 partners. That is absurd. You would be doing most of the work. You would be providing the land and keeping us fed. Sounds fair to me. Delilah was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those keen green eyes. Why would you do this? You do not know me. You could be riding into Shafter and finding proper work, getting proper pay. Because I need this as much as you do, Zachary admitted. I need to build something after watching everything I knew fall apart. I need to prove to myself that I can stick with something, see it through. And because if I ride away from here knowing I left you to face winter alone, I will add that to the list of failures I carry. I do not think I can afford another one right now. The honesty of it hung in the air between them. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the walls and reminding them both of the harsh reality of their situation. Finally, Delilah extended her hand. Partners, she said. 50-50. Zachary shook her hand, feeling the fragile bones beneath the cloth wrapping, and something in his chest that had felt hollow since his brother's death suddenly felt less empty. Partners, he agreed. Now, let me see what I can do about that roof before we both freeze. Working by lamplight, Zachary managed to patch the worst of the holes in the roof using the boards from the lean-to, and some nails he found in a rusted tin. It was rough work, and it would not hold up to a serious storm, but it would keep most of the wind and weather out for now. Tomorrow he would ride into Shafter and see what he could buy or trade for. By the time he finished, exhaustion was pulling at him. He had been riding for 3 days with minimal sleep, running from memories that seemed to follow no matter how far he traveled. The physical work had helped, giving him something concrete to focus on, but now his body was demanding rest. He made himself a rough bed in the lean-to using his bedroll and saddle blanket. It was cold, much colder than the inside of the homestead, but it was tolerable. He had slept in worse conditions during roundups. As he settled in, he heard Delilah moving around inside, the soft sounds of her preparing for bed. Sleep came quickly, deeper than it had been in weeks. For the first time since finding his brother, Zachary did not dream of blood and failure. Instead, he dreamed of spring, of green shoots breaking through dark earth, of a garden heavy with vegetables, of a small homestead repaired and solid, and of green eyes that looked at him with something warmer than desperation. Morning came cold and bright. Zachary woke to the sound of Delilah moving around outside, and he emerged from the lean-to to find her coaxing a fire to life in a circle of stones. "Morning," she said, glancing up at him. In the clear light of day, he could see her better than he had the evening before. She was pretty in a delicate way, with fine features and pale skin that spoke of too much time indoors. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she had changed into a dress that, while worn and patched, was cleaner than what she had worn yesterday. "Morning," he replied. "What are you doing out here? You have a stove inside." "Saving wood," she said practically. "The stove is good for heating the house at night, but for cooking during the day, this works just as well and uses less fuel." Zachary recognized the logic of someone who had learned to stretch resources to their limit. Smart thinking. "What are we having?" "I soaked those beans you brought overnight. Thought I would make a simple stew with some of the dried beef if you do not mind sharing more of your supplies." "Our supplies now," he corrected. Partners, remember, a small smile crossed her face. Partners. I am still getting used to that idea. It has been just me for weeks now. They worked together to prepare breakfast, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Delilah handled the cooking while Zachary tended to his horse and took stock of what needed to be done around the property. The list was extensive. The fence needed complete replacement in several sections. The well needed work. The homestead itself needed reinforcing, and the lean-to was barely standing. Over breakfast, which consisted of the bean stew and the last of his hardtack, they made plans. I will ride into Shafter today, Zachary said. Get a sense of what is available and what it costs. Do you have any credit in town? Delilah shook her head. Father did, but I think it died with him. Henry kept to himself mostly, did not make friends easy. And as a woman alone, well, you can imagine how I am viewed. Zachary could indeed imagine. The West was changing, becoming more settled, but that brought its own problems. A woman alone was either seen as desperate and therefore easy prey, or as a threat to the established order of things. Neither view was helpful. I will see what I can arrange, he said. I have a little money left from selling off my personal effects before leaving El Paso. Not much, but enough to buy some basics, and I am good with my hands. Might be able to trade labor for materials. You are sure about this? Delilah asked. Staying, I mean. You could use that money to get yourself somewhere new, start fresh somewhere else. I am sure, Zachary said and realized he meant it. Feels right being here, like maybe this is where I am supposed to be. The ride into Shafter took an hour on horseback. The town was small, built around the silver mines that gave it purpose. Even from a distance, Zachary could see the mining operations, the great holes in the earth where men descended daily to pull out wealth they would never personally enjoy. The town itself was a collection of weathered buildings clustered along a main street. There was a general store, a saloon, a small church, a livery stable, and what looked like a combination land office and bank. A few other structures filled in the gaps, including a boarding house and what might have been a small restaurant. Zachary tied his horse outside the general store and went inside. The proprietor, a heavy-set man with shrewd eyes, looked him over with the practiced assessment of someone who had been dealing with miners and cowboys for years. Help you? The man asked. Need some supplies, Zachary said. Lumber, nails, tar paper, that sort of thing. Also looking for information about work in the area. You working out at the Nichols place? The proprietor asked, surprising him. How did you know? Small town. People talk. Heard someone was out there helping the widow. Did not expect it to be someone who looked like they knew what they were doing. There was something dismissive in the man's tone when he mentioned Delilah, a casual disregard that made Zachary's jaw tighten. Mrs. Nichols is working her homestead claim. I am partnering with her on it. We will need supplies on credit until we can bring in a harvest. The proprietor laughed, not unkindly but not sympathetically either. Son, I have heard that story more times than I can count. Homesteaders come out here thinking they are going to make something of that land, but most of them fail. Henry Nichols was working that claim for 2 years and never made it pay. What makes you think you and the widow will do any better? Because I know farming and ranching, and I am not afraid of hard work, Zachary said evenly. We are not asking for charity. We will pay back every cent once we bring in crops. If you bring in crops, the man corrected. Tell you what, I am willing to extend a small line of credit, but you will need to sign for it personally. The widow does not have credit here, and I am not about to extend it to her. The injustice of it stung, but Zachary understood the reality. A woman alone, especially one whose husband and father had failed to make the land pay, would be seen as a poor risk. He would have to be the one to take on the debt. That is fine, he said. I will sign. They worked out an agreement, enough credit to buy basic materials and some staple foods, to be paid back at 20% interest after harvest. It was not ideal, but it was better than nothing. Zachary made his purchases carefully, getting what they needed most urgently and planning to make do or improvise the rest. He also stopped by the saloon to inquire about work. The bartender mentioned that the mines were always looking for workers, but the pay was poor and the conditions dangerous. There was also occasional work helping with freight hauling when deliveries came through, and some of the more established ranches hired seasonal help. "What about hunting?" Zachary asked. "Game still plentiful in these parts." "Deer, rabbit, some turkey if you know where to look," the bartender said. "Not as much as there used to be, but enough. You any good with a rifle?" "Good enough," Zachary said. His father had taught both him and his brother to shoot, and Zachary had maintained the skill even when it was not strictly necessary. "Might supplement our food that way." He left Shafter with a wagon rented from the livery, loaded with lumber, tar paper, nails, bags of flour, cornmeal, beans, rice, and a few other staples. He had also bought a better shovel, some seeds for spring planting, and a few chickens that the general store proprietor had been willing to part with cheaply. The chickens would provide eggs and eventually meat, another resource to help them get through. The sun was past its zenith by the time he made it back to the homestead. Delilah emerged from the house at the sound of the wagon, her eyes widening at the supplies. "How much did all this cost?" she asked, worry creasing her forehead. "We have a line of credit," Zachary said. "Enough to get us through to harvest. It is in my name, but we are partners, so we share the debt." "I cannot let you take on debt for me," Delilah protested. "You are not letting me do anything. I made the decision. We are in this together now." He began unloading the wagon, and after a moment, Delilah joined him, her protests giving way to practicality. They stored the food supplies inside the homestead and stacked the lumber beside the lean-to. The chickens, a rooster and 3 hens, went into a hastily constructed enclosure that Zachary promised to improve. By the time they finished, the day was fading toward evening. "Tomorrow we start on the roof properly," Zachary said. "After that, the fence and the well. We work on the structure until it is sound, then we start preparing for spring in earnest." Delilah nodded, but he could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight of everything they were taking on. On impulse, he reached out and squeezed her shoulder gently. "We will make this work. I promise you that." She looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Why are you really doing this, Zachary? And do not tell me it is just because you need a purpose. You could find that anywhere." He considered lying, giving her an easy answer that would not complicate things. But she deserved honesty, especially after trusting him enough to let him stay. "Because when I saw you planting those seeds in frozen ground, refusing to give up even when everything was against you, it reminded me that hope is a choice. My brother gave up hope and it killed him. I almost did the same, just running away instead of staying to face what happened. But you lost just as much or more and you are still fighting. I want to be part of that fight. I want to help build something that lasts. And I want to prove to myself that I am not the failure I have been feeling like." Delilah's hand came up to cover his where it rested on her shoulder. "You are not a failure, Zachary Lawson. The bank taking your ranch does not make you a failure. Your brother's choice does not make you a failure. You are here, working, trying. That makes you brave." Something passed between them in that moment, a connection deeper than the simple partnership they had agreed to. Zachary felt it in the warmth of her hand on his, in the way she looked at him like she saw something worth believing in. It scared him, that feeling, because it was too soon and too complicated and they barely knew each other. But it was also real, undeniable, a small flame kindling to life in the cold. He stepped back, breaking the contact before he could do something foolish. "We should eat. Long day tomorrow." If Delilah noticed the abruptness of his withdrawal, she did not comment on it. They prepared dinner together, a simple meal of cornbread and beans, and ate while discussing plans for the coming weeks. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Zachary would wake early, tend to his horse and the chickens, then work on whatever repair was most urgent. Delilah helped where she could, holding boards steady while he nailed them in place, fetching tools, preparing meals. They worked well together, developing an easy communication that required few words. The roof took 3 days to properly repair. Zachary stripped away the damaged sections and replaced them with new boards, covering everything with tar paper to keep out moisture. It was hard work, especially in the cold, but by the time he finished, the homestead was significantly warmer and drier. Next came the well. The cover had rotted and fallen in, and the walls needed reinforcing. Zachary spent 2 miserable days working in the cold, damp shaft, shoring up the stones and building a new cover that would keep debris and animals out. When he finally emerged on the second evening, filthy and exhausted, Delilah had heated water for him to wash with. "You did not have to do that," he said, touched by the gesture. "Partners help each other," she replied, echoing his own words back to him. "Go clean up. I will have dinner ready when you are done." The warm water was a luxury, soothing his aching muscles and washing away days of accumulated grime. As he scrubbed himself clean, Zachary reflected on how much his life had changed in the space of a week. He had gone from aimless and grieving to purposeful, and if not happy, at least content. And it was all because of a stubborn woman planting seeds in frozen ground. He found himself thinking about Delilah more than was probably wise. The way she hummed while she cooked, the fierce concentration on her face when she was working on a task, the rare smiles that transformed her features. She was beautiful, he had realized, though it was a beauty that revealed itself slowly, in moments and gestures rather than in obvious features. But it was too soon to think about such things. They were partners, nothing more, and she was still grieving her husband and father. Zachary had no right to complicate their arrangement with feelings that might not be welcome. Still, he could not help but notice the way her eyes followed him when she thought he was not looking, or the way she found excuses to work near him. And sometimes, when their hands brushed in passing, or they sat close together planning the next day's work, he felt that same spark of connection they had shared that first night. 2 weeks into their partnership, a cold snap hit that made the previous weather seem mild by comparison. The temperature plummeted, ice formed thick on every surface, and the wind howled like a living thing. Zachary moved from the lean-to into the homestead, sleeping near the stove because the alternative was freezing to death. Delilah did not protest, understanding that survival trumped propriety. They huddled together in the small space, keeping the fire going day and night and venturing out only when absolutely necessary. It was during those long, cold days and nights that they really began to talk, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Delilah told him about her mother, a gentle woman who had loved books and music and had passed that love on to her daughter. She spoke of her father, brilliant and kind but lost after his wife's death, trying to outrun his grief by moving west. She talked about Henry, her husband, with a fondness that spoke of genuine affection if not passionate love. "He used to tell me I was too educated for my own good," she said with a soft laugh. "Said it made me ask too many questions. But he never tried to change me, never made me feel like I should be less than I was. I wish I had loved him the way he deserved, but I was grateful for him, and I think he knew that." Grateful is not nothing, Zachary said. Plenty of marriages have less than that. Did you ever come close to marrying? Delilah asked. Once. Girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. We courted for about 6 months when I was 22. Everyone expected us to marry, but then she met a banker from Dallas and decided she would rather have security and comfort than a rancher who smelled like cattle. He shrugged. Cannot say I blamed her. She made the practical choice. But it hurt anyway, Delilah said softly. At the time, yes. Now I can see it was for the best. We would not have made each other happy in the long run. Do you think that exists? Delilah asked. The kind of love that makes people happy in the long run. My parents had it, Zachary said. My mother died when I was 15, and my father never looked at another woman. Said he had already found his person and lightning did not strike twice. My brother had it too with his wife. They fit together in a way that made sense, like two pieces of the same puzzle. And you want that for yourself? Zachary looked at her, at the firelight dancing across her features, at the intelligence and strength in her eyes. I am beginning to think I might. The air between them grew thick with unspoken meaning. Delilah looked away first, her cheeks flushing with something more than the heat from the stove. We should sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day if this cold breaks. But as they settled into their separate spaces, the small room feeling both too large and too intimate, Zachary felt the shift in their relationship. They were becoming something more than partners, something deeper than friends, and while it terrified him, it also filled him with a hope he had not felt in a very long time. The cold snap broke after 5 days, and they emerged from the homestead like survivors from a siege. The world was transformed, everything coated in ice that glittered in the weak winter sun. It was beautiful and harsh, a reminder of nature's power. They threw themselves back into work with renewed energy. Zachary began rebuilding the fence, setting posts deep and stringing new wire that he had bought on a second trip to Shafter. Delilah worked on improving the chicken enclosure, building nesting boxes from scrap wood, and making sure the birds were protected from predators. In the evenings, they returned to the frozen beds they had prepared that first day and continued expanding them. It was still futile to plant, the ground too cold and winter far from over, but the work itself had become symbolic. They were preparing for spring, for new growth, for the future they were building together. One evening, as they worked side by side in the fading light, Delilah suddenly stopped and looked at the rows of prepared earth. "You really think we can make this work?" she asked. "Some days I believe it completely, and other days I think we are both crazy." "Probably a little of both," Zachary admitted. "But I would rather be crazy with a purpose than sane and lost. And when spring comes, when we see those first green shoots coming up, we will know it was worth it." "You have a lot of faith," Delilah said. "Not faith. Hope. There is a difference. Faith is believing without question. Hope is choosing to believe despite the doubts." Delilah turned to face him fully, her eyes bright in the dying light. "I am glad you stopped that day. Glad you did not just keep riding. I would not have made it through winter alone." "Yes, you would have," Zachary said. "You are stronger than you know, but I am glad I stopped too. Feels like maybe we saved each other." She reached out and took his hand, no longer wrapped in cloth. The cold had eased enough that they could work without the constant protection, and her skin against his felt warm and alive. "Zachary, I need to tell you something." His heart began to pound, hope and fear warring in his chest. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about this for days, trying to decide if it is too soon or inappropriate or foolish. But life is short, and I have learned that waiting for the perfect time means sometimes never getting the chance at all." She paused, gathering courage. "I have developed feelings for you. Real feelings, not just gratitude or partnership. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know I am probably supposed to mourn longer before even thinking about such things, but my heart does not seem to care about what is proper." The words hung between them, brave and vulnerable. Zachary felt something in his chest break open, a wall he had built around his heart crumbling away. "Delilah, I have been feeling the same way. I have been trying to talk myself out of it, telling myself it is too soon, that I should not complicate our arrangement. But the truth is, I think about you constantly. I love the way you hum while you cook, the way you refuse to give up even when things are hard, the way you look at the world like it is something to be understood rather than just endured. I am falling in love with you, and it scares me because I have already lost so much." "We have both lost so much," Delilah said, stepping closer. "Maybe that is why we found each other. Maybe we are supposed to be what comes after the loss." Zachary reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I want that. I want to build a life with you, a real life. Not just as partners working land, but as people who choose each other." "Then choose me," Delilah whispered, "and I will choose you." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, as if she was something precious that might break. She kissed him back with a hunger that spoke of loneliness ended, of hope rekindled, of two people finding each other in the wilderness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the world seemed different somehow, brighter and more full of possibility. "We should go inside," Zachary said, "before we freeze out here." Inside the homestead, they sat close together on the rough bench, hands intertwined, and talked about the future. They would work the land together, bring in crops, build up the homestead. Eventually, when enough time had passed and it was proper, they would marry. They would have a real partnership in every sense of the word. "I want children," Delilah said softly. "I know that might seem strange given everything, but I want a family. I want to fill this place with life and laughter." "So do I," Zachary said. "I want sons and daughters to teach and raise. I want to build something that lasts beyond us." They made plans late into the night, dreams spinning out between them like threads weaving into cloth. And when they finally settled down to sleep, Delilah rested her head on Zachary's shoulder, feeling safe and hopeful for the first time since her father had died. The rest of winter passed in a blur of work and growing intimacy. They labored on the homestead during the day, transforming it from a failing claim into something solid and promising. The fence went up, sturdy and straight. The well was finished and covered properly. The lean-to was rebuilt into a proper stable for Zachary's horse, with plans to expand it for more animals in the future. They also grew closer emotionally, learning each other's habits and preferences, their fears and dreams. Zachary discovered that Delilah loved poetry and could recite long passages from memory. Delilah learned that Zachary had a gift for woodworking and could create beautiful things from simple materials. They were careful to maintain propriety, knowing that a small town like Shafter would judge harshly if they appeared to be living as anything other than business partners. But in private moments, they allowed themselves the small intimacies of holding hands, of kisses stolen in the evening light, of sleeping close together for warmth and comfort. As February gave way to March, the first signs of spring began to appear. The days grew longer and slightly warmer. The ice melted and the ground began to soften, and one morning Zachary woke to the sound of birds singing, a sound that had been absent all winter. "It is time," he said to Delilah over breakfast. "The ground is ready, we can start planting." Her face lit up with excitement. "Really? You think it is warm enough?" "For the early crops, yes. We will start with peas and lettuce, things that can handle cooler weather. In a few weeks, we can put in the wheat and corn and later the squash and beans." They spent the next weeks planting, working dawn to dusk to get seeds into the ground. Delilah would walk the rows, carefully placing seeds at the proper intervals, while Zachary followed behind covering them with soil. It was back-breaking work, but it was also hopeful work, each seed a promise of the future. And then, one April morning, Delilah ran out of the homestead calling for Zachary with such urgency that he thought something was wrong. He dropped the axe he had been using to split wood and ran to her. "What is it? What is wrong?" She grabbed his hand and dragged him to the garden. "Look, look!" He looked down at the row she indicated and felt his breath catch. Tiny green shoots were pushing up through the dark soil, the first visible evidence that their work had not been in vain. The seeds had taken root. Spring had truly arrived. "We did it," Delilah said, her voice full of wonder. "We actually did it." Zachary pulled her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. "This is just the beginning. Wait until those peas start producing, until the wheat comes up golden. This is going to work, Delilah. Everything we planned is going to work." That evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Zachary pulled out a small object from his pocket. It was a ring, simple and made of twisted wire, something he had crafted himself from materials he had found. "I know it is not much," he said, suddenly nervous. "And I know we have not known each other very long, but I also know that I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Delilah Nichols, will you marry me?" Delilah looked at the ring, then at his face, and her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Zachary Lawson. I would be honored to be your wife." He slipped the ring on her finger and she held it up to catch the fading light. "It is beautiful." "Perfect, actually, because you made it. When we bring in the harvest, I will buy you a proper ring," Zachary promised. "I do not need a proper ring. I have this one, and it means more because it came from you." They married in May, in the small church in Shafter, with the preacher and his wife serving as witnesses. Delilah wore a simple dress she had made from cloth Zachary bought on one of his trips to town, and Zachary wore his best shirt and pants, cleaned and pressed. It was not a grand ceremony, but it was genuine, full of love and promise. The townspeople were polite but distant, still not quite sure what to make of the partnership between the widow and the cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere. But Zachary and Delilah did not need their approval. They had each other and they had the land, and that was enough. Summer arrived with heat and hard work. The crops grew, requiring constant tending. Zachary and Delilah worked side by side, watering and weeding, protecting their plants from pests and weather. They added to the livestock, buying 2 pigs and a milk cow with money Zachary earned doing occasional work in town. The homestead itself continued to improve. Zachary added a proper bedroom, giving them privacy and comfort. He built furniture, a real bed frame and a table with 4 chairs. Delilah planted flowers around the house, adding beauty to the functionality. In August, they harvested their first crops. The yield was modest but real, enough to pay back their debt at the general store with some left over to save or sell. Standing in the garden surrounded by baskets of vegetables and watching the wheat ripple golden in the breeze, Zachary felt a sense of accomplishment he had not experienced since, before the ranch failed. "We did it," he said to Delilah, who stood beside him with dirt on her face and satisfaction in her eyes. "We made it through winter, planted in spring, and now we are reaping the harvest. We actually did it." "We did," she agreed, "and next year will be even better. We will know more, have more experience. We can expand the gardens, maybe add some fruit trees. And maybe something else," Zachary said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Maybe by next harvest we will have another reason to celebrate." Delilah covered his hand with hers, her smile soft and secret. "Maybe sooner than that. I was going to wait to tell you until I was certain, but I think I am with child. It is early yet, but the signs are there. Joy flooded through Zachary, pure and uncomplicated. Truly. "We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby," Delilah confirmed. "I am happy but also terrified. What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this?" "You can do this," Zachary said firmly. "You survived winter alone. You built a farm from frozen ground. You are the strongest person I know. And you will not be alone this time. I will be with you every step of the way." They held each other in the garden they had planted together, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, and Zachary felt complete in a way he had not known was possible. He had lost so much, but in losing everything, he had found what truly mattered: a place to belong, a purpose to pursue, and a person to love who loved him in return. The baby came in early spring, as the world was once again waking from winter's sleep. The labor was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from Shafter who proved more supportive than Zachary had expected. When he finally heard his son's first cry, strong and healthy, Zachary wept with relief and joy. They named him David, after Delilah's father. He was a beautiful child, with Delilah's green eyes and Zachary's dark hair, and from the beginning he was loved beyond measure. The years that followed were not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when the crops struggled and money was tight. But there were also years of plenty, when the harvest was abundant and they could afford small luxuries. They added to their family, a daughter named Rose when David was 2, and another son named James when Rose was 3. The homestead grew along with their family. Zachary built additions to the house, creating bedrooms for the children and a larger kitchen for Delilah. They added more livestock, including horses and cattle, slowly building toward the ranch Zachary had once lost. But this time it was different. This time he built carefully, never overextending, always mindful of the lessons his brother's death had taught him. The townspeople slowly came to accept them, recognizing that the Lawson family was there to stay. Zachary took on occasional work helping neighbors, building his reputation as a reliable hand who knew both farming and ranching. Delilah became known for her garden, which produced some of the best vegetables in the area, and for her willingness to share her knowledge with other women trying to make the land yield. On their 10th anniversary, Zachary surprised Delilah by planting an apple orchard on the far side of their property. "It will take years before we see fruit," he told her as they stood looking at the rows of small saplings. "But I am thinking about the future. I am thinking about our children and their children and the legacy we are building." "You remember that first day?" Delilah asked, leaning against him. "When you saw me trying to plant seeds in frozen ground and thought I was crazy." "I did not think you were crazy," Zachary protested. "I thought you were brave and stubborn." "You definitely thought I was at least a little crazy," Delilah said with a laugh. "But you helped me anyway. You saw me at my lowest point and chose to stay." "Best decision I ever made," Zachary said. "Though I think technically you saved me, not the other way around. I was running away from everything and you gave me a reason to stop running." "We saved each other," Delilah said. "That is the truth of it. We were both lost and we found each other." They stood together in the orchard that would someday bear fruit, on the land they had reclaimed from winter, and Zachary thought about the journey that had brought them here. The loss and grief, the desperate hope, the hard work and slow building of something permanent. It had not been easy, but it had been worth every moment. Their children grew strong and healthy, learning to work the land alongside their parents. David showed his grandfather's love of learning, spending hours with the books that Delilah carefully collected. Rose had her mother's determination and her father's skill with animals, able to gentle even the most skittish horse. James was a builder like his father, always constructing something from whatever materials he could find. As the children grew, so did the stories they told them. Stories of how their mother had refused to give up even when everything seemed lost. Stories of how their father had chosen to stay and help rather than running away. Stories of seeds planted in frozen ground and the spring that eventually came. The most important thing, Zachary told his children one evening as they all sat around the dinner table, is that you never give up. Your mother taught me that. She was out there with a bent spoon trying to plant seeds in ground that was frozen solid, because giving up was not in her nature. That is the spirit that built this place, and that is what I want to pass on to you. And what I learned from your father, Delilah added, is that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running and face what scares you. He could have kept riding that day, but he chose to stay. He chose to build instead of retreat. That kind of courage is what creates a life worth living. The children listened, understanding that they were being given something precious, not just land or possessions, but values and history, a legacy of perseverance and love. As Zachary and Delilah entered their later years, they watched their children grow into adults who carried forward the lessons they had learned. David became a teacher, bringing education to the small but growing community around Shafter. Rose married a neighboring rancher and ran her own successful horse breeding operation. James took over the homestead, working the land with the same dedication his parents had shown. Zachary and Delilah built themselves a small house on the edge of the property, close enough to help when needed but far enough to give their son and his growing family space. They spent their days tending the garden that had started it all, now expanded and lush, and enjoying the grandchildren who filled their lives with noise and joy. One spring morning, 40 years after that first day when Zachary had seen a woman planting seeds in frozen ground, they stood together in the same spot where they had first worked side by side. The homestead was unrecognizable from what it had been. A thriving ranch with substantial buildings, productive fields, healthy livestock, and a family that had grown to include grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. We did good, did not we? Delilah said, her hair now silver but her green eyes still bright. We did better than good, Zachary replied, his arm around her shoulders. We built something that will last. We created a legacy. The seeds we planted grew, Delilah said softly. Not just the ones in the ground, but the ones in our children and grandchildren. The values, the determination, the love. Those are the seeds that matter most. Zachary kissed her forehead, this woman who had been his partner, his wife, his love for 4 decades. I am glad I stopped that day. Glad I saw you and chose to stay. I am glad you were stubborn enough to not take no for an answer when I tried to send you away, Delilah replied. I am glad we found each other when we both needed finding. They stood together, two people who had started with nothing but hope and determination, who had built a life from frozen ground and made it bloom. Around them, the evidence of their love and labor spread out in all directions. Fields green with growing things, buildings solid and well-maintained, family gathered for Sunday dinner, children playing and laughing. It was not the life either of them had expected when they met that cold December day. It was better. It was real and hard-won and full of meaning. It was a testament to the power of choosing hope over despair, of building instead of running, of planting seeds even when the ground seemed too frozen to ever yield. As evening approached and their family began to leave, promising to return soon, Zachary and Delilah sat on the porch of their small house and watched the sun set over the land they had claimed. They held hands, comfortable in the silence of a shared life, content in the knowledge that what they had built would continue long after they were gone. "I love you," Zachary said, the same words he had spoken thousands of times over the years, never losing their meaning or sincerity. "I love you too," Delilah replied, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me when I needed to be seen, for helping me when I needed help, for staying when you could have left. Thank you for teaching me about hope," Zachary said, "for showing me that even frozen ground can yield if you are patient enough, determined enough, brave enough to keep planting." They sat together as the stars began to appear, two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful from nothing but faith, hard work, and love. The seeds they had planted that first desperate day had grown beyond anything they could have imagined, spreading roots deep into the earth and branches high into the sky, sheltering generations to come. And in the garden that had started it all, the same garden where Zachary had first helped Delilah break through frozen ground, new seeds were being planted by their grandchildren, continuing the cycle of growth and hope and determination that defined the Lawson family legacy. The spring they had promised each other, that cold December day, had come, not just once but year after year, proving that even in the darkest winter, there is always the possibility of renewal if you are willing to work for it, wait for it, believe in it. Their story became legend in Shafter and the surrounding area. The tale of the widow and the cowboy who built a legacy from frozen ground, who proved that love and determination could overcome any obstacle, who showed that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unlikely places. And every spring, when the first green shoots pushed through the dark earth, the people of Shafter would remember Zachary and Delilah Lawson, and they would plant their own seeds with renewed hope, knowing that even frozen ground eventually yields to the promise of spring.